Great. Good to see you again.
Uh, I've known you for a long time, and I don't know if you remember, but the first time we met,
Go on.
you had explained your management style to me. Do you remember what that was?
Okay. That's funny. I just wrote about that like yesterday. Um, yeah, we talked about the concept of low touch, high value. That's how I lured you in and told the basic philosophy I have around, in particular, on coalition building and when you're working with a large group of people and especially with a group of very busy and active people. Um, so, for example, I worked a lot in the nonprofit sector when I was running Craigslist Foundation, and when it came to my board or when it came to people like you that had a lot to offer but didn't have much time, I took this approach of low touch, high value, where it was basically visualizing the value that any person or organization can provide as a pyramid. And the question is, what's at the top of the pyramid? So if the bottom of the pyramid is pouring soup and licking envelopes, what are the things that someone can contribute in 1 or 2 hours of their time a month that would have a transformative impact on the organization and the effort?
That's when I knew
Uh,
I was in love with you at that point. After after I heard that phrase, I'm going to be friends with him for a long
yeah, indeed, we have been.
time. So what are you excited about? What are you excited to see this year at West Coast Green?
Well, I'm really curious to see the sort of expansion of the scope of the mission and the vision and the program. From talking with the team over there, it seems like, oh, we might have some background music, by the way. From talking with the team over there, it's really exciting to see this expansion beyond only focusing on green building and looking at smart cities and smart grids. And so I'm curious to see what that'll entail.
What do you is that what you're working on now? What are you currently working on? What are you obsessed with right now?
I'm obsessed with several different things, but my main focus is on a consultancy that I started called Code Green Agency, and we're doing strategy, messaging, and fundraising for the green economy. And then I also just finished up a book, a Nonprofit Management 101, a field guide for social sector professionals. And there's 50 different authors involved, low touch, high values in
Right.
there. So yeah, there's 50 different authors across 7 different sections, 35 different contributions. And so I recruited all of those and have been editing that and also creating quite a bit of my own content. Essentially, it's the nonprofit boot camp that we did at Craigslist Foundation, but in a book format. And then I also have been teaching at UC Berkeley through their Haas School of Business. I teach an economics and philanthropy class.
And are you still involved with the city of San Francisco's the
I'm
mayor's thing?
not. No, I was a commissioner for the environment for the city, but I termed out.
Oh, nice. Okay. And then what you've been well steeped in nonprofit stuff for a while. First with through the Craigslist Foundation and the boot camp that was incredible, and that people described as kind of a life changing experience. What do you see that needs to happen in order for us to move from here to where we need to go?
You're talking about in the nonprofit sector in particular, or you're
In
talking
any
about as environmental community?
whatever
Well,
you
let me speak to the environmental community because that's really the audience for West Coast Green. Um, so in my mind, and this is actually the reason why I started Code Green, is it's based on this premise. Um, and Thomas Friedman in Hot, Flat, and Crowded kind of talks about this concept in a different way. He talks about Code Red, right? And in his book, he's talking about when we had the Cold War and when we had some of the other issues in the past, in particular on war, there was this Code Red mentality where it was like all hands on deck, and now we need Code Green, right? And I don't. I think of it differently because in my mind, the real question is why hasn't the environmental movement been more successful in the last 45 years since Silent Spring was written, maybe even before that. And the answer in my mind is that we've been operating underneath the code red mentality. We've been operating underneath this idea of, it's a sense of urgency, a state of emergency, and more than anything, the premise that we've been working within is based on this idea of we are trying to convince the rest of the world that climate change presents the biggest threat and challenge to face mankind.
Mhm.
And as a result, they should be afraid, very afraid, and they should sacrifice. And that message is not hitting home for the American people.
Well,
And
it's a
to some
downer.
extent, it's a downer. It's disempowering, and it's not the kind of stuff that generates action at the speed and the scale required, right? And it's also, we tend to rely very heavily on the environmental case for sustainability. And so if we're talking to someone that doesn't believe in climate change or feels like we have 100 years to deal with it, you know, we're sunk. And so the alternative to this code red mentality is code green. And in my mind, that's based on a fundamentally different premise, which is that instead of climate change is the biggest threat and challenge to face mankind, it's, you know, environmental sustainability presents the biggest business and wealth generating opportunity since the Industrial Revolution. And so how do we actually capitalize on that? And all of a sudden, instead of using fear and sacrifice to drive change, and granted we could be much more effective at scaring people, but still not going to be enough.
Yeah.
The alternative is, how do we use opportunity and self-interest to drive change, which is something that works very well in this country. And so for me, that's the turning of the corner that really needs to happen if we as a movement and as a society are to move forward.
I agree. I think fear only works for so long. And then ultimately, it's even Orwell talked about this 60, 70 years ago. It has a diminishing return. What's the biggest challenge for you right now? Is it kind of changing people's mindset, or is it getting people to understand this kind of simple change in motivation?
I think definitely the failure of framing is probably the biggest challenge for all of us. So how do we move beyond this woe is me mentality that's sort of fear-based to one that's opportunity-based? I think for me personally, as I look to maximize my contribution, you know, I think a lot about, you know, is it evolution or is it revolution? Like, how far do we take this? One of the sessions that we'll be presenting at West Coast Green is on the California Green Plan, which is a very ambitious sort of, you know, swing for the fences approach at fundamental policy reform for the state of California, and really taking a comprehensive and integrated approach to sustainable development planning for the state. So this has been done internationally, first in the Netherlands and New Zealand. The EU has a green plan, Canada, Singapore, and a couple others. But, you know, the basic premise is that as opposed to another piecemeal approach where we're doing policy around water and around transportation and around green building and energy, or policy for a specific region or area, what does it look like for us to solve the entire puzzle at the same time and take kind of an ecological-based or systems-based approach to solving the issue, and not only looking at the environment, but also tying in the economy. So we're in the middle of, you know, rallying you know, an effort that we formed this California Sustainability Council to work on this initiative with the goal of putting forth some policy recommendations for both of the incoming gubernatorial candidates by the end of the year. And so that's something that could be very exciting. I mean, when the Dutch first did this, it was 233 different policy changes at once. So very, very ambitious, but the people behind the effort really felt like if ever there was a time for this, and they've been talking about this for 3 years through the Fort Baker Leadership Summits, that now was the time, given the governor's election that's coming up, and also given the attack on AB 32 through Prop 23. And so, you know, we can't keep doing these one-off approaches. AB 32 is the most extensive thing we have. You know, but obviously we're getting some pushback from Texas-based oil companies. So part of what we're hoping to do with this effort is get the private sector involved from the get-go, so they play a proactive role in policy development, along with government leaders who are adopting that as policy and NGO leaders that are playing an watchdog role.
That's something that Paul Hawken said a long time ago was, and I remember it blew my mind at the time, and this was maybe even 10 years ago. He said, we have to solve all the problems at once. And he's so much smarter than you and I are, it seems.
Put together.
Yeah, put together. But I remember, I mean, I still think about that, trying to fully understand what he was saying. And now I'm starting to grasp it, and I'm starting to see it here in California with these kind of chess moves that we've made in the state with AB 32, with SB 375, AB 811, and all of our different moves. And then to see this thing appear on the ballot for this coming November for Prop 23, which is sponsored by 2 oil companies and a coal company, to try to undo a 2006 law that blocks global warming emissions, for me, it kind of made me a little depressed. I mean, are you depressed, or are you as hopeful as ever?
I was more shocked than depressed, actually, because I don't know if you read the op-ed piece that Meg Whitman wrote.
I did.
Which is really what started this whole kind of movement, from what I could tell. So she wrote an op-ed saying that if she were to be elected governor, that the first thing she would do on her first day in office is suspend AB 32 because of its unknown effect on the economy. And I kind of shook my head and scratched my head and wondered what she was thinking. And at the time, I thought she was committing political suicide and that all of her donors were going to be very upset, when in reality it turned into a whole movement. Because, you know, from my perspective, there's 500,000 clean tech jobs in the state. It is the only growing sector of the economy as we've gone through this recession. So it seems like a no-brainer, and this whole sort of green economy space is really our next big opportunity, as I mentioned, with this whole Code Green concept. So, you know, what it did for me when I saw her not get ostracized, but rather see this turn into a proposition and a ballot measure, was it made me realize I was in a bit of a bubble and we still have a lot of work to do. And so the question is, how do we move the agenda forward? How do we help people really understand? And I think giving business a seat at the table is a big part of the solution. You know, we have a great tendency, Kevin Danaher from Global Exchange likes to talk about, you know, that we're on the Titanic. There's no question, no doubt that, you know, every living system on Earth is in a state of decline, and the environment has substantial problems. And so what we generally like to do in San Francisco as activists is run around the deck of the Titanic shouting, "This boat sucks, I protest." And that's not very useful, just like rearranging the deck chairs isn't useful, as people like to talk about. But the real action that's needed is we need to build another boat. You know, we need to build a solar-powered boat with a tiki bar and people, you know, scantily clad bikinis with drinks in their hand with a booming sound system. And we need to sail up alongside the Titanic. And we don't need to tell them that their boat sucks, that, you know, they're in danger. All they need is a viable alternative, and they will willingly jump to, you know, to this other sort of sustainable, locally powered party boat. And so how do we create that, and how do we create these working models that present an alternative to people? And I think that's more than anything what needs to happen is we need to show that this jobs versus polar bears, you know, choice is really a myth and a misnomer, and that in fact ecology and economy can be aligned. And what the world needs to move forward are the working models that really dispel that.
The trouble is that fear-based narrative, even though it's temporary and not long-lasting, people seem to get seduced in by it. So the Meg Whitmans of the world, and even the Prop 23 language from Valero and Tesoro, the oil companies that are backing it, the way that it's written is very fear-based. If you don't repeal it, it's going to cost us millions of jobs, and people hear that and they get a visceral reaction to it, and in that regard, it's very effective, and it doesn't even hold up to truth or logic, because I've been presenting truth and logic for decades now, and
I've seen you on CNN.
It doesn't seem to matter. So that's a part where that's why I got depressed by seeing this Prop 23, and hopefully everybody will just vote no on it and see through it. It's for what it is. But with that being said, do you see this changing? Are things converging? I mean, is this solar powered tiki party boat? Is it well under construction now, or what?
Yeah, I think that the ark is being built. So, you know, I think that there's a couple different things happening. So, you know, first off, I think part of what I saw in an interview that you did on CNN, I think, and they asked you the green architect question that they always ask, which is, well, what's this going to cost us, Eric? And that's fine, and that's a valid question, but the other question that they are failing to ask, and that groups like Global Footprint Network are really doing a pioneering job, is essentially we as a community, not even the environmental sector, but the world, have been looking at a P&L, have been looking at a balance sheet, but only looking at the expense side of the equation, right? So we're only looking at the costs without looking at the savings and the profits and the revenues. And so what we need to start doing is really counterbalancing the two of those So yes, we are looking at, what does it cost to put solar panels on, or to do the energy efficiency retrofits, et cetera. But we're also looking at how does that counterbalance, and that becomes part of the equation, in particular in the media as we start talking about this, but also in politics. It's just, it hasn't been part of what's being factored in. So yeah, of course, there's, we can't afford this, but oh, wait a minute, it's a 3-month payback, so maybe we can't afford not to. And that's part of, I think, what needs to become part of the dialogue.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and being in this kind of exciting Mission Cafe that you're sitting in here.
Yeah,
and
and I should mention one other thing, by the way, because there's actually 2 different sessions that we'll be presenting at West Coast Green this year. One is the California Green Plan that I mentioned a minute ago. The other is a solution salon. And we're working on the exact theme right now with the organizers of the conference, but essentially it's an executive roundtable that's very focused on resource sharing. So we'll have an executive roundtable, we'll have about 15 people to a circle, 10 to 15 people, and really the idea is, leveraging that kind of high opportunity network that is the West Coast Green audience. So whether it's gathering people around transportation or energy or water or green building, or possibly just, environmental entrepreneurs that are running their own businesses, we'll be gathering them in a circle. We'll be exchanging, a little bit about each of our organizations and what we're up to, but more importantly, we'll be focusing on what are the single greatest challenges and obstacles that we're facing right now, and then open it up to the rest of the group to really share resources, ideas, experiences, and contacts so that we can all really come together and experience community in action, basically. So that'll be the other workshop.
That's great. I can't wait. I'm so excited about it, and it'll be good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while, so I look forward to seeing you at West Coast Green in a few weeks.
Thanks. Me too.
Thanks.